John Steenhuisen, the leader of the Democratic Alliance and the Minister of Agriculture, has issued a statement condemning President Cyril Ramaphosa for his remarks at the BRICS summit. Mr. Ramaphosa gave remarks at the BRICS summit in Russia, and this has led to John Steenhuisen making the statement that he made to the whole of South Africa, to the whole world. And this has also now made things very awkward in the GNU coalition because John has effectively contradicted his boss on foreign policy in front of the whole world. And this can lead to some confusion as to what is the official foreign policy of South Africa and will it change in relation to Russia, in relation to Ukraine, and in relation to the conflict in that part of the world. Listen to the statement.
Putin is your ally, Mr. President, not South Africa's. The Democratic Alliance distances itself from recent comments made by President Ramaphosa during bilateral engagements with Russian President Vladimir Putin, where he stated that Russia is a valuable ally and friend. The Democratic Alliance, as a key partner in the government of national unity, rejects this characterization in no uncertain terms. The Democratic Alliance does not consider Russia or Vladimir Putin to be an ally of our nation. We cannot and will not agree that South Africa should consider an authoritarian regime that is currently violating international law by waging an imperialist war of aggression against a sovereign state as an ally. At a time when South Africa is experiencing renewed optimism with the first real prospects of economic growth in almost 2 decades, our government simply cannot afford to make statements that could jeopardize international relations and trade opportunities, which are crucial for realizing our key objectives of growth and job creation. As leader of the Democratic Alliance in the GNU, I reiterate the importance of positions expressed on behalf of the GNU being the subject to full and proper debate within the government mechanisms before being announced as positions of the GNU to ensure maximum consensus and agreement amongst the parties to the GNU.
There are 3 questions I want to look at in this particular episode. Number 1, should the GNU determine foreign policy holistically, or can the ANC do it unilaterally? Number 2, has the isolation of Russia failed? And number 3, does BRICS membership actually benefit African nations? Some key facts about BRICS. And remember, BRICS is not a Stina. It's not someone who's about to take your girlfriend. No. BRICS is an acronym for a group of 5 major emerging economies: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. It has expanded its membership, and that expanded membership now includes Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, the UAE, and Saudi Arabia, question mark, because Saudi Arabia was invited, but they've just basically been saying, don't call me, we'll call you type of thing. Because even now, the Saudi Arabians have been meeting with the Americans at the same time that this particular conference is happening in Russia. So, just more facts if you want to know them about BRICS. BRICS basically right now represents over 40% of the world's population. It represents over 25% of the global economy. This current conference happening in Russia is the 16th BRICS summit. The whole project of BRICS began in 2006, originally with Brazil, Russia, India, and China. South Africa then joined in 2010. More countries joined last year. As things stand, Turkey and Malaysia have applied to join. Lots of countries that want to be part of BRICS. The Russian president, Putin, is hosting the annual BRICS summit, which started on Tuesday, ending today on Thursday at the time of this recording in Russia's southwestern city of Kazan. There are about 36 nations that are attending the 2024 summit. Some very high-profile attendees include the President of China, Xi Jinping, the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, the President of Russia, Vladimir Putin, Cyril Ramaphosa, as you know, Masoud Pezeshkian, the president of Iran. You've got the president of Egypt, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. You've got Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, the president of the UAE, known as MBZ. You've got Abiy Ahmed, the prime minister of Ethiopia. You've also got Nicolas Maduro, the president of Venezuela. You've got also from Africa, Denis Sassou Nguesso, the president of the Republic of Congo. These are just some of the most high-profile persons of interest who are attending this particular summit. The aims of the BRICS group vary. There are political interests, there are economic interests, and there are also geopolitical interests. The key stated goals include strengthening cooperation in trade, finance, and development to boost economic resilience, reforming global governance institutions to better represent emerging economies, reducing reliance on the US dollar by increasing trade in local currencies, fostering sustainable development through initiatives like the new Development Bank for infrastructure projects, enhancing political influence to advocate for a multipolar world order that challenges Western dominance. These are some of the stated goals. But different countries, especially at the top of the BRICS bloc, want different things, right? And are frustrated by different things. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more, just so that you have some indications in terms of economic data. The GDP of China is 17.79 trillion US dollars. The GDP of India is 3.73 trillion. The GDP of Brazil is 2.2 trillion. South Africa's GDP is at 863 billion. So there are some discrepancies between the sizes of different economies within the BRIC bloc and also some economic indicators on the ground, right? All 5 initial member states are members of the G20 with a combined nominal GDP of 28 trillion US dollars, which is about 27% of the gross world product. They have a total GDP per person of around GDP per person parity of around 65 trillion, which is 33% of the global GDP triple P. And they have an estimated 5.2 trillion in combined foreign reserves, US dollars, as of 2024. So as you can see, the numbers are quite impressive. To put it in perspective, right, the GDP of the USA in 2023 was 27.36 trillion US dollars. So significant size within the BRICS bloc, but still a bit of a gap between where BRICS stands as a group and where America stands alone, right? Now let's get to the meat of this conversation. Is the Democratic Alliance correct? I'm going to start off by saying yes. I think that the DA is right. The 2024 elections did shift the dynamics of power in the country. The ANC is not running South Africa alone, and they cannot run South Africa alone at this particular point because they need the support of their coalition partners. And the largest coalition partner is the Democratic Alliance. I hold the view that they cannot therefore be drafting foreign policy or making foreign policy decisions as if it's still 2022, because it's not. They're not running the country alone. I think that they should actually consult with the DA in formulating domestic and international policy. Of course, they're not doing that, but that doesn't mean that the DA is not correct to complain about it, because the ANC is treating them now not even like a passenger in the taxi who's counting change. They are treating them like someone who's sitting at the back seat saying short left, short left. The ANC is they're taking the DA for a ride. The DA really may have miscalculated a lot of things, but I want to agree with them in respect to the fact that they should have a voice. All of the coalition partners should have a voice. They should be consulted. The ANC has continued with foreign policy as if things have not changed, but they have changed. Foreign policy is the domain of the executive, but the DA are part of that executive. They are in the cabinet. Right? So I think that there should be some kind of a GNU forum on the foreign policy direction. But what we've seen is that there's a lot of issues that the ANC, the DA, and others have not yet resolved. There's no plan. There's no midterm plan for how they're going to actually be doing a lot of things in the next 5 years. And we're beginning to see now the third dust up between the ANC and the DA. And it was a predictable one. We all know that the DA leader, John Steenhuisen, traveled to Ukraine. He traveled, he was taking pictures, looking at missiles and looking at all kinds of things. He was very clear that the DA stood, on the side of Ukraine. He made it very clear that the Democratic Alliance viewed Russia as the aggressor. The ANC, on the other hand, has stood by Russia, right? And it has shown itself to be an ally of the Russian government, right? So, for instance, in August of 2022, then South African Defense Minister Thandi Modise departed for Moscow for the 10th Moscow Conference on International Security at the invitation of the Russian Minister of Defense. In October of 2022, South Africa was one of 35 countries that abstained from a vote condemning Russia's annexation of Ukrainian territories. In November of 2022, South Africa abstained from a UN General Assembly resolution calling for Russia to pay reparations for the damages inflicted on Ukraine. In February of 2023, South Africa abstained from a United Nations General Assembly resolution calling on Russia to withdraw its military forces from Ukraine. In total, South Africa has abstained 5 times from motions of this nature. In June of 2023, South Africa led an African contingent, including leaders and representatives from 7 countries, who met with Ukraine's President Zelensky and Russia's President Putin. But there was a lot of criticism because of this idea that they wanted to also meet with the Russian president. Overall, even though South Africa has said, listen, we are talking to both sides, it's clear that there has been a lot of affinity for Russia. That's very clear. And as a result of that, one of the questions that was asked during the negotiations, and I'm one of the people who asked it on platforms such as YouTube, was how is this thing going to work? How is this coalition between the ANC and the DA going to work? Because they don't see eye to eye on a variety of issues, including foreign policy. And now we are seeing that there's been this major dust-up as a result of the remarks that were made by President Ramaphosa. Predictable remarks, right? Because it was very clear that he was going to say those things in Russia. It was very clear. He attended. He's somebody who is very comfortable to say that they consider Russia to be an ally. It was very clear. So what does that mean for the DA? These questions were asked, but at the time when they were being asked, many people who were just keen to push through with the GNU were saying, no, don't worry about this, don't worry about that, don't worry about this, these things will be resolved. And I don't know if the clearinghouse is going to resolve these things, right? Because now there's supposed to be this clearinghouse, right? So I'm going to come back to this DA conversation a little bit later, but that's where I want to park it for now. I just want to make some comments around the BRICS summit in and of itself, right? China and Russia are actively reshaping the global order. And they're doing this in ways which show that America and the G7 do not have control in the way that they did. They're succeeding in reshaping the world. If you think about it, the sanctions against Russia have basically failed. And all the efforts to speedily resolve the war, which we're being told by NATO and all of these other entities, have not worked. They told us we're going to deal with Russia, we're going to be able to, get Russia out of Ukraine, etc., etc. It hasn't worked. This conference also comes at the back of the China-Africa conference held earlier this year, and at the back of the Russia-Africa conference held last year. So all of this is showing that the attempts to isolate Russia have not worked. And this therefore means that the global community needs to rethink how we're trying to resolve issues between Russia and Ukraine. And I don't know how the new American president, or the new but not new American president, depending on who wins, is going to deal with these particular issues, right? And then in addition to that, the fact that a NATO member in Turkey is seeking to join BRICS is something that must truly vex the West, NATO, and everybody who is pro-Ukraine at this point. Because fundamentally, while on one side you're trying to isolate Russia, to make Russia the pariah, Turkey is coming to say, no, we are going to work with Russia and we're going to be part of this group that Russia is part of. And all of this shows that we are now in a system where the power of America, the power of Europe to basically say, "Kukhale sami isicathulo," and that's it, is no longer there. Things are shifting, dynamics are shifting. But that leads to a question. Is BRICS good for Africa? I have mixed feelings, and I'll tell you why. And I want you to tell me what you think about what I'm going to say. And I'm curious to hear how you reflect upon it for yourself. So number one, the UAE is now a member of BRICS. But the UAE has been implicated in a variety of actions which I submit to you are not particularly beneficial for Africa. The UAE is implicated in the ongoing atrocities in Sudan, particularly through its support for the Rapid Support Forces, the RSF. The RSF is a paramilitary group which is fighting the Sudanese army and is accused of committing genocide and ethnic cleansing. Those are the accusations that face it. And if you know about the genocide in Darfur, which happened in the early 2000s, some of the leaders of the Rapid Support Forces were implicated in that, right? So Sudan is a major crisis that doesn't get discussed enough on the global stage, and the UAE's fingers are there. Reports also indicate that the UAE, right, which has been supporting and supplying weapons to the RSF, is using the other side of the African challenges, which is Libya, to provide those weapons. Because the other reports are that the RSF the RSF is receiving weapons from Libya, but that the Libyan militia leader, Khalifa Haftar, is being supported as well by the UAE. Now, if you don't know Khalifa Haftar, he is a prominent Libyan military officer and politician who is known for his role as the commander of the Libyan National Army, which is based in eastern Libya. Libya is currently divided between two governments, the government of national unity, based in Tripoli, and the eastern-based government of national stability, right? These GNUs, they show up all over the place, which is supported by Khalifa Haftar's Libyan National Army. The conflict that has been happening since 2011 in Libya, right, fundamentally is one where you can also trace back the UAE. So Libya used to be a stable country. It was destabilized by the intervention by the Americans, by the French, the no-fly zone, all of that history you know. But what happened is that post the killing of Gaddafi, there was this protracted civil war, and it's still continuing. And the UAE has been implicated in being part of that. So effectively, the Sudan crisis and the Libyan crisis can, in some way, to a degree, be linked back to the UAE. That then makes me question, are we in good hands to be in BRICS, close to a country like UAE, which is causing commotion in Africa? Open-ended question. And some of these things, of course, the UAE denies, etc. Then let's talk about the role of China. The role of China in Africa bothers me, and I haven't reached a final determination on whether or not China in Africa is a force for good or actually is a force for underdevelopment as well. And the role of China in Africa bothers me because I wonder sometimes if their role in Africa is not just another form of neocolonialism. And if it is, how is it any different from what was done by the West? Right? Let me give you some of my thinking. The DRC, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, is in conflict and chaos and is severely underdeveloped, primarily because of the conflict that arises as people are extracting cobalt. That cobalt, right, that is facilitating all of these computers that we're using, smartphones, lithium batteries that then power the electric cars, etc., etc. It's coming out of the DRC at a very high price, but it's being mined by the Chinese, and it ends up in China. That is where the manufacturing happens. The Chinese government works closely with many African leaders who are objectively oppressive and corrupt. They undermine the development of their people, the human development of their people. Then I get concerned to say, is China only interested in working with these elites and they don't give a damn about you and I? Are they only interested in being able to get access to African resources while, taking our leaders along, talking all of this anti-colonial rhetoric because it's popular on the continent, while acting in neo-colonial ways? I worry about that. Then there's the other thing, right? If you think about it carefully, often when American companies go to China to start, offshore manufacturing in China, whether it's Tesla or Apple or whatever, when they bring products to China, they have to train the Chinese in those factories where those products are being made. The skills are transferred. However, when Chinese companies come to do infrastructure projects in Africa, they often use labor from China. And this blocks that transfer of skills. It blocks that creation of employment from those particular projects. So then, even though they are doing these projects, some of which are just white elephants because they're not really used in the way that they advertise, then the question then becomes, is it useful to us as ordinary Africans? It's clear to me what China wants, right, from BRICS and other entities. They want to shift the global order in their direction. Right now, there are two, right, very, very powerful countries. That's America and China. And part of China's interest is that it wants to weaken American power and influence over the global order and affairs. That's clearly what's in it for China. In BRICS, what's in it for Russia? Russia is obviously frustrated by sanctions. It obviously wants NATO to move away from what it considers to be its neighborhood. And it's also frustrated by how it's been undermined by the Americans, etc. Right? So this is what's in it for them. They are at war with Ukraine, a country which is trying to get into NATO, a country which has allied itself with the West. It's clear to me what's in it for Russia. But what's in it for us, ordinary Africans? Why must we clap for people who embrace African dictators, work with African dictators, extract African minerals for cheap so that they can produce? Does India and China and any of these, Brazil even, do they have any interest in us as Africans improving our industrialization? Or do they want to substitute Europe and get the resources from us instead of Europe getting those resources? That's my concern, is that we're walking into these things clapping hands for all of these entities, but are we benefiting? I don't know what you think. Let's talk about it. Back to the GNU. Now the question then becomes, will John Steenhuisen be disciplined for this action of undermining his boss on foreign policy? Because he's not just a leader of opposition anymore, right? He's actually part of the government of national unity. He's a minister. He swore an oath and to be a minister under the direction and leadership of President Ramaphosa. So I don't know if they'll discipline him, but now we have to be looking at this thing and thinking carefully. On the national health insurance, there's been a split between the Democratic Alliance and the ANC. On the Bella Act, there's been a split between the Democratic Alliance and the ANC. On Russia, Ukraine, there's been a split between the Democratic Alliance and the ANC. Is it likely that the ANC at some point will have to then use the ANC Gauteng model to govern? Will they have to do that? Or will the DA accept all of these contradictions and stay in the coalition to keep the MK and the EFF out of power, which they've said they want to do? I don't know how many more of these things the DA will go through or put themselves through before they say, we're going to walk. I think it's still early, but it's a lot. Now, the spokesperson for the president today made an announcement on X, and this is what he said. The DA retains the right to maintain its own foreign policy position. However, that position cannot be imposed on the president under the guise of the GNU. The president will not be micromanaged by the DA in his execution of South Africa's foreign policy. He's basically saying, "Tak!" That's what he's saying. Saying, "Tak! Ngeke ngizwe ngani." That's what he's saying to them, basically. So where does that leave the DA? Where does that leave the DA? My final remarks, though, are that I don't think that the ANC is correct here. I think they have to consult. I think they do have to consult, because you can't just determine foreign policy unilaterally. Not when your power requires the support of others to exercise. It's just what I think. I think that obviously they're going ahead with it, but I think that the DA is not wrong to say, you guys need to stop treating us like a side chick. Not even like a side chick, like a backseat passenger of this coalition. When you wouldn't be in government, you wouldn't be president without us. And I think they'll get a lot of support. You know, Cape Town, Western Cape, they are pro-Ukraine, very pro-Ukraine. So a lot of the DA donors, a lot of the market leaders, market owners are going to take DA's side on this. But I don't know, what do you think? Not about the foreign policy position per se, because that's a side discussion towards this point, right? In terms of, is the foreign policy position correct or wrong, or does it have contradictions, etc.? But about the fact that the president is making the foreign policy position without any consultation. He's continuing with the foreign policy position of the ANC without any modifications, alterations, or adjustments. Is that correct? Do you think that's the legitimate thing to do? Let's have a conversation. Till the next one.